One of the things we love to do is smoky hot takes. We love to look back at Tennessee, the football history that is just incredibly deep. And when we talk about great seasons by any player, we can debate on and on and on. We did that with quarterbacks just recently. We're going to do that now with running backs. The top 10 greatest seasons ever by a Vols running back, and it's brought to you in part by Craft Treats, crafttreats.com. Use the promo code Off the Hook. The promo code Off the Hook, get 20% off. You'll love it. crafttreats.com with the CBD treats. They'll help with your pet's digestive issues, also the arthritis issues, and don't forget about the anxiety issues. crafttreats.com. Use the promo code Off the Hook. So the top 10 seasons by University of Tennessee tailback. You've got number 10, Alvin Kamara in 2016. It's both sad and gratifying that he is on this list. It's sad that he's not higher because he's an even better tailback than what he was under Butch Jones, but it's gratifying that he made the list even without being an integral part of Butch Jones's offense. That guy, I knew it from day one, simply special. I'm going to share one other thing. He is by far the best junior college player that I have ever seen from an off-the-field standpoint. Not only did he show up to Tennessee, didn't know anybody, things didn't work out at Alabama, he goes to junior college. This is his last opportunity, and he accepted it and embraced it and went after it. And I've got so much respect for that young man. And when he wasn't being played enough, he just smiled. He never complained. He never even gave a hint, Caleb, that he was unhappy with his playing time. So you got him at number 10, 2016. Why? Before we get to the rest of the list.
Yeah, he barely made it because it was, but I couldn't ignore the efficiency. And he was a weapon on special teams. You have more respect for him than I do because I'm not, maybe he needs to stop trying to beat up guys on Las Vegas elevators. But I will say that as a player, I had to cut some people off that I didn't want to put Alvin Kamara on. But when you look at that 2016 season, I just couldn't ignore it. So, but he did barely make it.
Yeah, and by the way, can we go ahead and say that special teams is not a third of the game anymore, especially with the changes that's been made, or just count the number of snaps? It's a simple fact. It's not a third of the game. Beatty Feathers comes in at 1933. He should have probably won the Heisman if it existed that year per Sports Illustrated. I'm going to run down a couple more. Jamal Lewis in 1997. Boy, he was good, and it just reminds you how had he not gotten injured in 98, that team was already unbeatable. They were 13-0, but he would have taken them to a whole nother level. It's just crazy good how good he was. And he was one of those backs that you saw one carry, Caleb, and you said, oh my, that guy is special. I remember saying, and I was young too, I remember saying it's like a bull in a china shop. He runs angry, and that was Jamal Lewis.
Yeah, and again, this is one that there were similar seasons, 3 others that I had to cut off the list that were similar to Lewis in 97, and that was Johnny Jones in 84, Chuck Webb in 89, and Travis Henry in 2000. The reason Jamal Lewis in 97 got the nod is he was, and you probably remember this, Dave, he was a huge threat in the passing game. I mean, how many times did Peyton Manning hit Jamal Lewis with a swing pass that went 30 yards, 40 yards for a touchdown?
Yep.
And that changed everything.
Hank, by the way, Johnny Jones, we've all got that first guy we gravitate towards. So I guess I was about 10 years old. He was my first favorite Tennessee football player for whatever reason. Tony White was my first favorite Tennessee basketball player. Hank Laricella, 1951, out of the wing tee. And then you get to a guy, Reggie Cobb.
Single wing, not wing tee. Doug Dickey ran the wing tee. Nailing single wing.
Excuse me, I misspoke. Single wing, and then you get to Reggie Cobb in 87. There were things that sidelined his career off the field. I got a lot of respect for him because he turned his life around, graduated from the University of Tennessee, and was climbing the ranks in the NFL. Reggie Cobb, in some ways, was similar to Jamal Lewis in the way they just ran angry.
Yeah, I mean, That's the only reason Chuck Webb couldn't be on the list, was because he only really was the starter half the season in '89, because Reggie Cobb was the starter beforehand. And you start to think, man, talk about being loaded. I mean, we talk about Jamal Lewis to Travis Henry. Reggie Cobb to Chuck Webb was pretty darn good too.
Golly, man, he was good. God rest his soul. Tony Thompson in 1990. Now, he's not one of the greatest running backs. He's probably talent-wise the worst running back on this list. But what he did after Chuck Webb went down was pretty phenomenal. I went to that game for whatever reason, and it was the game where he had 220 yards. And I thought, wow, I guess this Tennessee team just turns out fantastic running backs by the dozens, and a lot of that was the offensive line, but he ended up running for over 1,200 yards that year.
Yeah, it helps when you're running behind two top 10 picks on the line, Charles McRae and Antoine Davis. But gosh, that 1990 team was so loaded. I'm sorry, I just have to point that out, how loaded the 1990 Tennessee football team was. But Tony Thompson stepping in and just balling out was very, very incredible. You're right, Chuck Webb, I keep bringing him up because I hate leaving him off the list, but he was a better running back than Tony Thompson. But Thompson, the thing that's forgotten is Tony Thompson was a small, big play guy, but you could trust him on the goal line for those little 1-yard gains if you needed to.
If Chuck Webb's healthy, is that the best group of running backs of all time, or do we talk about? I'm trying to think of who else if Chuck Webb stays healthy.
I mean, what I saw of Chuck Webb, and I've only seen highlights, but I've never seen a running back do what he does with his highlights. I mean, I saw Adrian Peterson before Adrian Peterson and Chuck Webb, if I'm being honest.
Pretty good comparison. Travis says, no way you leave Morristown's own James Littleman Stewart off this list. We'll get to that. Maybe it's on the list, but he had to split a lot of time with some other cats. So
he didn't have a season that stood out. During that era, Charlie Garner had the best season in '93.
Yeah, this is just seasons. So I'm going to defend my guy Caleb on this one. And he had Aaron Hayden, too, that was there.
That's true.
Carrying the
and Mose Phillips, who had the greatest run in Tennessee history that's forgotten about because Tennessee lost that day.
Yes, at fullback, but he did get a good number of carries when fullback was a thing. All right, so if you can tell me who's number one, by the way, on this, I'm going to hook you up with a hooker shirt. So go ahead and start posting those on the message board. You tell me who's number one. So we just did Tony Thompson in 1990, best seasons by a UT running back. Montario Hardesty in 2009. Kudos. You mentioned two of my favorites in Alvin Kamara and Montario Hardesty, purely from a media perspective. Probably those two, along with Eric Berry, because of what they had to endure as players and still talk to the media in a very mature fashion. He's one of my guys that are right up there.
Yes, Montario Hardesty. You know more about this than I do because you know about the injuries. And in hindsight, Fulmer was proven right. I'll give him some credit on that. But Tennessee fans, Dave, I don't know if you were covering the team at the time, but I knew Tennessee fans, they were so angry that Fulmer would not play Hardesty more. And they felt that he had it out for him. But
you know me, I'm not afraid to call out Fulmer's missteps. I remember interviewing Montario Hardesty, and I said, how's your knee? And he said, which one? I mean, they were both in bad shape. So, yeah, he got the most out of his body that he possibly could, and he gave it to Tennessee. Reminds me of Jason Mitchell, the linebacker. So whatever potential was left in the NFL to make money, he didn't have it because he gave it all to Tennessee. So you got Jay Graham at number 3 in 1995. So it's you say there's a new era of running backs, as the early 90s were marked by James Stewart, Mose Phillips, Aaron Hayden, and Charlie Garner. But Jay Graham, again, that's when my formative years of watching football, that's when I was watching it, and it just seemed like Tennessee had the ability to churn out great tailbacks. He was one.
Yeah, and Jay Graham had the 75-yard run to, for people who don't remember the 95 Tennessee-Alabama game, Tennessee dominated, but Alabama had a point where you thought it was going to be a game. They got within 2 touchdowns. You probably remember it, Dave. The crowd was kind of back in the game, and one handoff to Jay Graham for an 80-yard touchdown silences the crowd in a heartbeat. The next year, when Alabama comes to Knoxville, Tennessee's down 13-0. They tie it up at 13, and then Graham gets the ball and runs 75 yards for the game-winning touchdown. Just back-to-back Alabama. Jay Graham has 2 of the most famous runs in Tennessee football history against Alabama.
Again, you don't have to pick the year, but you tell me the player who had the best season ever, the running back, and I'm going to hook you up with a hooker shirt. All you got to do is post on the message board, just the player. You don't have to give me the year. So it's getting interesting here. We're getting down to the nitty gritty. Travis Stevens, 2001. I will go ahead and tell you, I know the offensive line was great, but this would probably be number one on my list. You did more research for the other guy, not to give anything away, but definitely is in terms of guys that I covered, the doubt around him was so incredibly strong. I remember one reporter saying this was 2001 when the Florida game got moved to the end of the year because 9/11, and he had a good game before Florida. I can't remember who.
Arkansas. 41 carries for 200 yards.
Very good. Good gracious. He's like a politician. But I remember this reporter, because this is how pervasive the doubting was about what he was doing that year, talking about Travis Stevens. They said, let's see what you do against Florida. Well, he ran for like 200 yards and put Tennessee in position to play for an SEC championship and national title. So I got a lot of love for him. So I'm going to give everyone one last moment to post on our message board who had the greatest season of all time. Just give me the players. Don't give me the year. You don't have to give me the year. And it might be on offthehooksports.com. There's a pretty good hint. Okay, and by the way, a couple of questions from the message board before we get to number one. Everybody agrees that Cooper's the most important player. He's the guy you want in bubble wrap. Robert Rexroad asked, why don't we get junior college players anymore? They still get some, but to be real,
the transfer portal is going to change that. It's just changed it too much.
Yeah, I mean, you'd rather see them against high-level competition, and let's face it, the money got bigger in college football, and the academic requirements got a little bit lower. Guys get into school more often. I mean, that's just there's no Prop 48. Remember when John Henderson had to sit around for a year ready to play?
Stupid, yes. Hey, I'm going to say it. I agree with Cardale Jones when he said, why do we got to go to classes when we're here to play football?
I'm with you. Very good. All right. So we had number one, and it was going way back, and you can read the story on offthehooksports.com, going way back to 1929. Who was it?
Gene McEver, the first superstar in Tennessee football history. And he had a school record that still stands to this day, 18 rushing touchdowns, 5 rushing touchdowns in a game against South Carolina. McEver, like Beatty Feathers, would have won the Heisman had it existed during that time. Most of the running backs or the backs in the single wing were triple threats. So that's why, Johnny Majors is technically a tailback, and the same with Bobby Dodd, but they were more passing tailbacks. That's why they didn't make this list. But McEver was specifically a runner. Same with Feathers and same with Lorenzella. That's why they made this list. And McEver made Tennessee football a national name.